Unity Station 7 had a reputation for tolerating the unusual. It had too. When your permanent population included 4 species of obligate carnivores, 2 species of obligate herbivores, a Korathi engineering corps that worked exclusively in total darkness, and a rotating roster of Delvari merchants who considered eye contact to be a legal contract, tolerance for unusual things was less a virtue and more a survival skill. But Oskar Weber and his cat tested even Veridian's considerable patience. Oskar was a human atmospheric systems technician in his mid-30s, a compact, bearded man with the kind of calm, unhurried demeanor that comes from spending a decade fixing things that broke in the vacuum of space, where panicking was not only useless but aerobically expensive. He had sandy brown hair that he kept slightly too long, a collection of worn flannel shirts that his colleagues found baffling in a climate-controlled station, and a talent for diagnosing ventilation problems by sound alone that his supervisor, a Sendra named Chief Talvar, described as uncanny, though she said it in a tone that made clear she meant it as a professional compliment and not as anything mystical. He had transferred to Unity Station 7 months ago. He had brought 4 duffel bags of personal effects, a toolbox that other technicians quietly coveted, and Maxwell. Maxwell was a gray tabby cat, 5 years old with dense, striped fur the color of storm clouds, a white patch on his chest that looked vaguely like a misshapen star, and the particular expression that gray tabbies seemed to be born with, a look of deeply considered, slightly contemptuous appraisal, as if Maxwell had evaluated the universe and found it acceptable but not impressive. He weighed 4.8 kilograms. He had opinions about where he sat that were not negotiable. He had once knocked a full cup of coffee off Oskar's desk with sustained, deliberate eye contact, and the expression on his face while doing it had suggested he considered this not vandalism but communication. The station's regulations on live animal companions had not been updated since the installation of the original habitat modules 20 years ago, and contained a clause permitting domesticated Earth fauna in individual crew quarters, provided the crew member assumed full liability, and the animal received clearance from the station's biological containment office. Oskar had gone through the process with methodical thoroughness. Maxwell had received his clearance. Maxwell had also bitten the containment officer during the examination, which the containment officer had noted in the report, and which Maxwell had appeared to consider settled business. The other species on Unity Station 7 did not know what to make of Maxwell. This was putting it generously. The Delvari, who were slim, gray-skinned humanoids with large eyes that processed light differently than human eyes, and who communicated partially through subtle skin tone shifts, found Maxwell disturbing in a way they struggled to articulate. They could perceive the slight infrared heat signature of his body clearly, which meant that to Delvari senses, Maxwell was surrounded by a faint, warm glow at all times, like something perpetually on the verge of igniting. They gave him significant clearance in corridors, and filed 3 separate inquiries with station administration, asking whether the human small glowing creature was a regulatory matter. The Korathi, stocky and ridge-backed and deeply practical, mostly ignored Maxwell, but one of the junior engineers had witnessed Maxwell catch and consume a large insectoid station pest in under 2 seconds while maintaining an expression of total serenity, and had gone straight back to his bunk to compose a very long message to his family about it. The Solvek were the most vocal. The Solvek were Unity Station 7's largest resident species, bipedal and broad-shouldered, with heavy brow ridges and a cultural tradition that placed enormous value on utility, on every individual, every resource, every relationship having a clear and demonstrable purpose. They were not cruel. They were not malicious. They were simply, profoundly, structurally incapable of understanding why Oskar Weber housed, fed, and apparently held affectionate conversations with an animal that did nothing. The Solvek administrator of the residential tier was named Gravhaus, and he raised the issue formally at the first monthly all-hands meeting after Oskar's arrival. He was a big, gray-skinned being with close-set eyes and a voice like a cement mixer, and he delivered his concern with the earnest, systematic thoroughness of someone who had prepared for it. The human Weber, Gravhaus said, consulting his notes, maintains a non-working animal in his quarters. This animal produces waste that requires specialized filtration. It consumes processed proteins that occupy cargo weight. It contributes nothing to station functions. I am requesting a formal review of its presence. Oskar was in the meeting. He had his hands wrapped around a coffee cup and the look of a man who had anticipated this conversation. Maxwell's a companion animal, he said. Humans keep them. It's a documented cultural practice going back thousands of years. A practice with what practical basis? Gravhaus asked. This was not a hostile question. It was a genuine one. Psychological well-being, Oskar said. Mental health. Studies consistently show that human crew members with companion animals perform better on extended postings. Fewer stress incidents, better sleep, lower rates of the kind of cognitive drift that comes from isolation. Gravhaus considered this. The animal makes you function better, he said. Yes. You require an animal to function. Oskar paused. When you put it like that, it sounds bad, but essentially, yes. Gravhaus made a note. He was not satisfied, but he was a bureaucrat first and an ideologue second, and the documentation Oskar had submitted was thorough. He tabled the formal review. He did not, however, stop watching Maxwell with the focused skepticism of a being who has been told something is useful and is waiting for the evidence. Maxwell, for his part, was entirely unaware of the bureaucratic conversation around his existence. Or if he was aware, he had filed it in the same mental category, as most things Oskar told him directly, acknowledged, considered, and declined. He spent his days in Oskar's quarters and the maintenance corridors immediately adjacent, which Oskar had quietly arranged access to through the simple method of leaving the door open and letting Maxwell decide what he wanted to do. Maxwell's range expanded over the weeks in the gradual, methodical way of a territorial animal establishing a map. He knew the ventilation grill in Corridor 7 that released a warm downdraft at irregular intervals and was an excellent napping location. He knew that Chief Talvar always had a food container in her bag, and that if he sat near her feet for long enough she would eventually produce something. He knew every junction in the maintenance sublevel, every access panel, every dark corner where the station's circulation system created interesting acoustic properties. He also knew, before anyone else on Unity Station 7 did, that something had moved in. It began with sounds. Small sounds, the kind that a human ear in a busy station would process as background noise and discard. The scratch of small claws on metal. The rapid, irregular skittering that happened in the space between the inner hull and the thermal insulation. Maxwell began sitting in the middle of Corridor 9 with his head cocked to one side, tracking something through the wall with the focused, unblinking attention of an animal whose entire ancestral history was built around the question of what is in there. Oskar noticed. "What are you hearing, Bud?" he asked one evening, crouching next to Maxwell in the corridor. Maxwell did not look at him. His eyes were fixed on a seam in the paneling where the lower wall met the floor, and his tail was moving in the slow, rhythmic way that, if you knew cats, meant he was not relaxed at all. He was coiled. The next morning, Oskar ran a routine inspection of the thermal insulation in the maintenance sublevel and found the first evidence. Small, irregular holes chewed through the insulating material, the edges gnawed in a pattern he didn't recognize. He photographed it and submitted an incident report to Station Biology, marking it as possible pest intrusion, species unknown. The biology office response came back in 2 days. It was from a researcher named Dr. Pell, a Delvari with a subspecialty in invasive xenofauna, and it was not reassuring. Based on the bite radius and distribution pattern, Dr. Pell's report said, this appears consistent with early-stage Kolorian Zarg-Rat colonization. If confirmed, this is a significant concern. The Kolorian Zarg-Rat is native to the Kolorian system's industrial stations, where it evolved in metal-rich, high-radiation environments. It is approximately the size of a large Terran rodent, but considerably more robust. Its skeletal structure is partially mineralized. Its teeth are capable of breaching standard-grade hull insulation and light alloy panels, and it reproduces at a rate of approximately 1 liter per 18 standard days under favorable conditions. Zarg-Rats are known to cause catastrophic systems damage when infestations reach critical density. They are attracted to electrical insulation, which they consume as a dietary supplement. A mature infestation can compromise a station's primary systems in a matter of weeks. Standard elimination protocols involve targeted sonic disruptors, chemical treatment of all affected sections, and a mandatory 3-week evacuation of contaminated areas. Please escalate immediately. Oskar read this report at his desk at 6 in the morning with Maxwell sitting on the desk next to him, watching his face with the attentive expression Maxwell used when Oskar's body language suggested something interesting was happening. "We have a problem," Oskar told Maxwell. Maxwell's ear rotated toward the wall. The problem, it turned out, was larger than the initial report suggested. Dr. Pell came to conduct a physical survey and found evidence of activity across a 30-meter stretch of the maintenance sublevel. Not an early-stage colonization, but a population that had been quietly establishing itself for at least 6 weeks, almost certainly introduced via a cargo shipment from a Kolorian transit hub 2 months prior. The infestation had spread through the thermal insulation layer and was beginning to probe into the primary electrical conduit housings. The station commander, a weathered human woman named Commander Vazik, who had been running Unity Station 7 for 9 years, and had the permanently slightly tired expression of someone who had handled too many crises to be surprised by new ones, called an emergency meeting. "Options," she said, looking around the table. Chief Talvar, the Sendra head of maintenance, spoke first. "Sonic disruptors are effective but require section evacuation. If we evacuate the sub-level maintenance sections, we lose access to primary ventilation control and secondary power routing for a minimum of 3 weeks. During that window, we cannot guarantee climate stability in any of the residential tiers." "Chemical treatment?" Commander Vazik asked. "The Zarg-Rats have demonstrated resistance to every chemical protocol in the standard Kolorian removal database," Dr. Pell said. He had the Delvari habit of speaking with complete, measured calm regardless of the content, which in this context was either reassuring or more frightening depending on your perspective. "The population aboard Kolorian stations developed resistance over generations of exposure. Our standard agents will have limited efficacy." Grav Haas, who had come to the meeting because the residential tier system's integrity was directly implicated, folded his large hands on the table. "The infestation must be addressed before it reaches critical density. What is the realistic timeline?" "At current growth rate," Dr. Pell said, "we have approximately 4 weeks before the electrical conduit housings are compromised. At that point, we would face primary systems failures that could cascade." He paused. "I should also note that Zarg-Rats are functionally invisible to our standard sensor grid. They evolved in environments with strong electromagnetic interference. Their own biology disrupts proximity scanning." The room absorbed this. Oskar had been sitting quietly at the far end of the table, a position he occupied at most meetings, having learned early that the most useful place to be in a room full of people talking about infrastructure problems was close to the edge, ready to be called on. He looked down at the table for a moment. Then he said, "Maxwell could do it." The room turned. "The cat," Oskar said in response to the expressions. "He's been tracking them for 2 weeks already. I thought he was just hearing things. He knows exactly where they are. He hunts." He paused, searching for the right framing. "On Earth, cats have been eliminating rodent infestations in human settlements for roughly 10,000 years. It's what they were domesticated for originally, before companionship. They were working animals." Gravhaus's expression shifted in a way that, for a Solvek, was extremely subtle but which Oskar had learned to read over 14 months. It was the expression of a being who has been waiting for evidence and is now carefully considering what has just been presented. "The animal hunts," Gravhaus said. "Very effectively," Oskar said. "You said it was a companion." "It's both," Oskar said. "Cats contain multitudes." Commander Vazik looked at Dr. Pell. "Could it work?" Dr. Pell considered the question with genuine scientific interest. "The Zarg-Rats' primary defenses are speed, small profile, and electromagnetic disruption of detection systems," he said. "A predator hunting by scent, hearing, and visual tracking would be entirely unaffected by the electromagnetic disruption. A cat's sensory apparatus is, in several relevant ways, superior to our detection technology for this specific application." He paused again. "It is unconventional. So is having a Zarg-Rat infestation eat my primary conduits," Commander Vazik said. She looked at Oskar. "What does Maxwell need?" Oskar thought about this. "Access to the sublevel, all the access panels open, don't get in his way." The next morning, Oskar opened the maintenance sublevel access hatch in Corridor 9 and set Maxwell down in front of it. Maxwell sat for a moment. He looked into the hatch. His nose worked rapidly, processing the complex chemical information that lived in the air of that dark, metal-lined space, the particular biology of animals that had evolved in industrial environments, the sharp mineral smell of gnawed alloy, the organic trace of a population that had been living and eating and reproducing in the walls of Unity Station 7 for 2 months. His pupils dilated to full black circles. He went in. What happened over the following 72 hours was documented by 3 separate things: Oskar's personal log, a motion-sensitive monitoring system that Chief Talvar installed in the access corridors, and the ongoing biological survey that Dr. Pell ran to track the Zarg-Rat population signal. Oskar's log entry for Day 1 read: Maxwell went in at 6:30, came out at 1400 to eat, went back in at 14:30. He knows exactly what he's doing. I'm not worried about him. The Zarg-Rats should be worried about him. The motion monitoring showed Maxwell moving through the maintenance sublevel in long, unhurried sweeps, quartering the space the way hunting animals quarter terrain, working systematically from the point of entry toward the deepest concentrations of infestation. He was not frantic. He was not desperate. He moved with the patient, absolute confidence of an animal doing the thing it was built by 10,000 years of coevolution to do. Dr. Pell's population survey told the clearest story. On the morning of Day 1, he had estimated the Zarg-Rat population in the sublevel at between 80 and 120 individuals. By the morning of Day 2, his readings suggested significant reduction in the central sections. By the end of Day 3, the survey registered near-zero activity across the previously contaminated 30-meter span. Maxwell came out of the maintenance hatch on the afternoon of Day 3, sat down in the middle of Corridor 9, and cleaned his face with the same methodical, unhurried thoroughness with which he had done everything else. His white chest patch was pristine. His expression was the same one he always wore. He looked at Oskar, who had been sitting on the floor outside the hatch for the last 4 hours waiting, and the look said with complete clarity, "Done." Oskar scratched behind his ears. Maxwell allowed this, and after a moment began to purr, a sound like a small engine running smoothly, which echoed slightly in the empty corridor. Dr. Pell conducted a full follow-up survey over the next 2 days. He found evidence of 11 surviving Zarg-Rats in the most peripheral sections of the sublevel, well below any threshold of concern, and no evidence whatsoever of surviving individuals in the primary electrical conduit zones. Chief Talvar's maintenance team went in and repaired the damaged insulation. The primary systems showed no further irregularities. At the following monthly all-hands meeting, Commander Vazik delivered the post-incident summary and concluded by announcing that Unity Station 7 was formally updating its companion animal policy to recognize the category of working companion, an animal that fulfilled both psychological support and functional station roles, and that Maxwell Weber was, effective immediately, operating under this designation. There was a brief silence. Grav Haas, who had filed the original formal review of Maxwell's presence, sat very still for a moment. Then he said, "The animal's value was not visible until the correct conditions existed to reveal it." "That's one way to put it," Commander Vazik said. "I have made an error in my assessment," Grav Haas said. "For a Solvek, this was a statement of significant weight. Their culture had a specific word for the acknowledgement of an error in resource evaluation, and it carried with it an implicit obligation to correct the record." Grav Haas looked at Oskar. "I withdraw the formal review. The record should reflect that the animal's value was established prior to the event." "I appreciate that," Oskar said. "I would like to understand," Grav Haas continued, in the tone of a being organizing a genuine inquiry, "how you knew that the animal would do this." Oskar thought about it. "I didn't know exactly," he said. "I know Maxwell. I knew he'd been tracking them. I knew what cats are capable of. But knowing Maxwell specifically, his personality, the way he pays attention, the way he is about things he's decided to do, I had a pretty strong feeling he'd handle it." Grav Haas was quiet for a moment. "You trusted the animal." "I trust Maxwell," Oskar said. "There's a difference." This distinction appeared to require further processing on Grav Haas's part, but he wrote it down. The Korathi junior engineer who had once watched Maxwell dispatch a pest in under 2 seconds had not forgotten the incident, and after the all-hands meeting, he found Oskar in the maintenance corridor and asked, with the directness that Korathi brought to all questions, whether it was normal for a human to trust an animal the way Oskar trusted Maxwell. "Pretty common, yeah," Oskar said. "Why?" the engineer asked. His name was Tech, and he had 12 fingers and the practical, concrete-minded curiosity of someone who wanted to know how things worked, not as philosophy, but as engineering. Oskar thought about this for a moment. He was crouched down doing a panel inspection, and Maxwell was sitting 3 meters away in the corridor watching Tech with the evaluative expression. "Because he's given me reason to," Oskar said. "Trust usually works that way. You watch someone long enough, you understand how they are, you know what they're capable of. Maxwell's been showing me who he is for 5 years. I've just been paying attention." Tech looked at Maxwell. Maxwell looked at Tech. The evaluation appeared to be mutual. "Could I touch it?" Tech asked. "You can try," Oskar said. "He'll tell you if he doesn't want you to." Tech approached with the specific careful body language of an engineer, approaching something unfamiliar, slow, non-threatening, hands visible. He crouched down to Maxwell's level. Maxwell's nose worked. He appeared to arrive at a conclusion, stood up, walked the 3 meters to Tech and stepped directly onto his lap, turned around once and sat down. Tech sat very still. His expression was the Korathi equivalent of someone trying not to react to something surprising. After a moment, in a voice that was carefully level, he said, "It is warm." "He tends to do that," Oskar said. "It chose this location," Tech said. "He does that too." Tech sat with Maxwell on his lap for the remainder of Oskar's panel inspection, which took about 20 minutes, and at no point did he stop looking at Maxwell with the expression of someone recategorizing their understanding of something. When Oskar finished, and Maxwell stood up and stretched and walked away to investigate something more interesting, Tech stood up as well and dusted off his knees and said, "The cat is unusual." "For this station, yeah," Oskar said. No, Tex said, apparently choosing his words carefully. Among living things, it is unusual among living things. Oskar looked at Maxwell, who had found the warm air ventilation grill and settled himself across it with the satisfaction of an animal whose interior geography of the universe is exactly as expected. He is, he agreed. The Delvari inquiries about the small, glowing creature stopped after the incident, though Dr. Pell continued to stop by Oskar's quarters periodically, ostensibly for follow-up monitoring, but in practice spending most of the visit sitting on Oskar's small couch with Maxwell beside him, making notes in a personal research log that he had titled, in the Delvari scientific tradition of extremely literal nomenclature, Observations on Felis catus. Behavioral adaptability, environmental utility, and the limitations of pre-assessment. Chief Talvar, who had known about Maxwell's tracking behavior before the meeting because Oskar had mentioned it to her the day after he'd submitted the incident report, and who had quietly made sure the monitoring system was in place before Oskar volunteered anything at the all-hands meeting, said nothing about any of this publicly. When Oskar thanked her afterward, she shrugged in the way Sendra shrug, which involved more shoulder than a human shrug and somewhat more finality. I've been watching cats work on long-haul ships since I was a junior tech, she said. I knew what he'd do. I just needed everyone else to see it for themselves. Is that why you didn't say anything beforehand? Oskar asked. Understanding things you've been told is different from understanding things you've watched, Chief Talvar said. She sounded exactly like Oskar had sounded in the corridor, and she said it in the same tone, not philosophical but practical. The way people talk about things they have simply learned to be true. Maxwell received, in the weeks following, a formal entry in the Unity Station 7 personnel log. The designation was Working Companion, Atmospheric and Biological Integrity. There was a photograph Maxwell sitting on Oskar's workbench in the maintenance bay, looking at the camera with the expression of an animal who has been photographed many times and has made his peace with it without ever becoming enthusiastic about it. Gravhaus stopped by the maintenance bay one afternoon, about 3 weeks after the all-hands meeting. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching Maxwell sleep on top of a folded thermal blanket in the corner, a location Maxwell had selected because it was warm, elevated, and gave him a clear sightline to both entrances. The animal selected that position, Gravhaus said. He always picks the best spot in any room, Oskar said, without looking up from the conduit junction he was testing. It's one of his things. Gravhaus stood there for a moment longer. Then he said, I would like to understand this better, the relationship between the human and the animal, when you have time. Buy me a coffee, and I'll tell you anything you want to know, Oskar said. Gravhaus did not know what coffee was exactly, but he recognized the structure of the offer and accepted it in the Solvek tradition, which meant it was now a scheduled meeting, and he would arrive exactly on time. Maxwell opened one eye, assessed Gravhaus in the doorway with his usual combination of complete attention and apparent indifference, and closed it again. The white patch on his chest rose and fell with the slow, easy rhythm of a creature that had done the job and earned the rest. In the official maintenance report filed by Chief Talvar following the incident, under the heading Asterisk Contributing Factors, Resolution, there is a single line. It reads, Successful containment achieved via application of evolved biological expertise. See attached documentation on Terran domestic predator utility, submitted by Dr. Pell, Xenobiology. Oskar kept a copy of that report. He had it framed, eventually, in a small black frame that he hung above his desk. Maxwell, in the years that followed, knocked it off the wall twice. Not maliciously, Oskar was fairly certain, but with the same deliberate, communicative energy he brought to everything. Both times, Oskar picked it up and put it back.